We won't achieve what we need to achieve, lifting 2 billion people out of poverty, without community. When we work in community, we achieve more. We grow a little bit more because we know that we have people calling us to account.
Ordinary people living extraordinary lives, building enduring legacies. Welcome to Philanthropist Friday with your host, Matt Johns.
Today I had an incredible conversation with Richard Lackey, the CEO and founder of World Food Bank, an innovative hybrid organization designed to support farmers and agriculture, empowering them to feed the world for generations. Through his past experience in finance, he mastered the art of recognizing inefficiencies. And in 2011, he discovered what he determined to be the world's most inefficient market: food. From there, he started working on a plan. And in doing so, he inadvertently created a case study with one farmer in Uganda. After seeing the impact his education and strategy consulting plan had, he knew he was onto something significant and quickly scaled this into a process, which became the foundation of World Food Bank. Now, this success was no stroke of luck. Richard has been successful in many arenas, notably 3 decades in finance. He led multiple companies which were later sold to Goldman Sachs and E-Trade. He also served as managing director for 5 successful private funds and has even authored multiple books. Richard has made many media appearances and thousands of people have watched his TED Talks. He's frequently asked to serve on a global level, including appointments to USAID and the World Agriculture Forum. I'm grateful for this opportunity to dive in with him here. There's no question that he's driven to make a sustainable impact on the world. Welcome to my conversation with Richard Lackey.
The way that we feel like we can have the biggest impact on everything, really, on working all the way down from the ultimate of healthier food, which helps people that are, in every country, but also especially those people that are in tough economic areas. But it also, if you use regenerative practices, you can take people living in poverty and lift them out of poverty by growing better food that not only makes it better for themselves, but better for the rest of the world. But also by using regenerative techniques, they build stronger soils. And so they store more water and they hold more nutrition in the soil. So they're more resilient to drought and pestilence and what have you. So by focusing on regenerative agriculture, we're really able to address a number of topics at the same time. So that's the exciting thing to me.
Now, this is such an interesting capstone for you and your career. And, I just saw on LinkedIn the other day that you got nominated or named, or you accepted a board position with the World Agriculture Forum. So tell me a little bit more about that and how that came to be.
It's a good question. I'm not necessarily a huge fan of the World Economic Forum, for example. In many ways, I think they've overstepped their bounds. That being said, if you're going to change agriculture in any way, preferably for the good, you do need to bring together the leaders in the agricultural space, and that includes the entire vertical. So that's people that manage soil, farmers and the like, commercial farmers, large commercial ag companies, people that sell chemicals. Some of those chemicals we don't really want to see on the market unless we have to, but some of them are still necessary. We have pests, we have weeds, and they need to be managed. But as we try to go through this rotation to more regenerative agriculture, you need to bring all parties to the table. So the World Agriculture Forum is the largest movement in that way. And so to be invited with a number of other global leaders in whether they're in agriculture or food systems or logistics or whatever the case may be, 30 global leaders are gathered on the board, and then about 200 advisory members. So it's a pretty massive effort. So I'm honored to be able to sit at the table and hopefully put in my 2 cents worth.
Well, there's some impressive folks on there too that you're a part of. So if there's a place to have influence in this world, I would imagine that's probably one of the centers of influence.
I agree. And yeah, so I'm just humbled to be part of it. And I expected, very much like when I served, I was appointed by the president to the board of USAID a number of years ago, the U.S. Agency for International Development. And the advisory board is called BIFAD, the Board for International Food and Agriculture Development. And while I felt like I got to add my 2 cents worth, I learned a tremendous amount as well. And I think that's going to be the same thing here. I'm sure that I will learn a lot more about systems and it will make me better at what I do. by being around all of these other extremely, knowledgeable, experienced people will help me as much as I'm going to be helping them. So it's selfish as much as it is serving.
I was really taken aback with your TED talk.
So,
One of them, at least. I can't remember which one it was, but where you were talking about seeing these inefficiencies in the food distribution and production throughout the world, and that there had to be a better way. So tell me a little bit more about the genesis of World Food Bank, how it came to be in your mind, and what it's grown into at this point.
the quick summary of my background is about 8 years in emergency medicine area, and and about 25 years as a hedge fund manager. And in the fund management side, my area of expertise has been in arbitrage or identifying market inefficiencies. So if when you are in Africa, it's very hard not to notice the market inefficiencies. And we had built, because of my work in emergency medicine, I'd been a volunteer on a surgical medical team and in a post disaster group. So we would travel to different areas after a natural disaster and help work with folks that had issues. And we would do the same thing in developing markets for community health and what have you. And we always had the issue of not having enough food where it was needed, when it was needed, especially in a post-disaster environment. Even in the United States, in Mississippi, Louisiana, after large disasters, oftentimes we'd wait 5-7 days. So organizations sitting there with their giant 40-foot trucks with cook stoves and institutional cookware ready to go, waiting for 5 or 6 days for FEMA to approve through Cisco or US Foods or whomever, which is not their business, trying to get them to reorg their distribution so that they can pull food into that disaster scene. And it just kind of hit me that and there's a story behind that you saw in one of the TED Talks. But in a world like we live in today, there should be no reason we don't have a network of stored food in strategic locations just outside of disaster prone areas, where when we know that storm is hitting, we put trucks on the road with 40-foot containers of food, freeze dried or dehydrated meals specifically prepared for that region to meet those trucks that are doing service, those NGOs, Send Relief and Texas Baptist Men and Red Cross and Salvation Army and whomever. So when they pull up with their cook stoves, there's product for them to actually cook. And by doing it in advance, they also pay a lot less money because you're buying the excess from farmers and markets when the price is low, and making those meals to this region specific. And then you have a very low storage cost. So if you use them every 3 or 4 or 5 years, it saves paying triple the cost in a disaster environment. So 2 other guys that ran hedge funds, we all put in some significant dollars and manufactured about 1 million meals. And the model worked really well. The challenge is FEMA and others are built on an annual budget rather than a long-term budget. So to build this up where you want them to buy and cycle, and you slowly build, you're just sitting there waiting. And when there's a disaster, if they use it, then they pay you, then you have to go back and make it. Well, if you're running manufacturing, you want to be manufacturing all the time in perpetuity, some portion. So manufacturers and co-packers are very disenchanted if you come make 1 million meals and then you don't do anything for a year. So we took the time to go build this model where we could do more regular manufacturing. While we were doing that and teaching and preaching and speaking about it, I was invited to the United Nations, who said, hey, that model will work easy and get more traction more quickly in Africa. You should check out this technology we use for storing food in Africa that hasn't really been, it hasn't matriculated there. And so I went and looked at these giant storage bags, the size of 2 40-foot containers stacked on top of 2 40-foot containers. So really big bags, right? And a bottom half and a top half. And the bottom half would kind of slide down, and it was made of like a PVC material with a liner in it so that gases and moisture can't cross the barrier. And they would stack grain, 50 kilogram, 90 kilogram bags of maize, soy, wheat, sorghum, what have you, and then put it on top. Put the top on and zip it up, and it's airtight. And the interesting thing about it, and this is one of those miracles of nature, there are always pests and bugs still in there. So they dry it and, put it in the bags, but it hasn't been cleaned. It hasn't been washed with soap and what have you. It's just been shaken and dried. So those bacteria and those pests that are still in there actually respire the remaining oxygen in the bag, and then they die. So within about 5 days, that bag is now oxygen free, and the grains or pulses or dried fruits and vegetables, whatever's in there, will last for 15 or 20 years because there's nothing to contaminate it or eat it,
Mm-hmm.
which is really interesting. And I tease people that, as a greedy capitalist pig, my initial thought was to go back to Iowa and stand in a cornfield and buy everything at harvest and sell it in the middle of winter. Um, but it's one of those times where we happen to be doing some work in the Middle East, and I flew back to Dubai after seeing this the day before. And after the UN had arranged for me to go see it, or World Food Program had arranged for me to go see this, and God kind of spoke to me and said, "Hey, Richard, I didn't send you to Africa to figure out how you could make more money in Iowa. The problem's in Africa, so go back to Africa." So I had a discussion with my wife and said, I think that we're being called to do something a little more substantial and something that'll make a bigger difference. So we started taking that idea of food conservation and seeing if we could build ecosystems of storing food. And this is where the idea or the concept and the name for World Food Bank came up. If you can buy pulses and grains and store them for 20 years, you can treat it as an asset class. So you could literally invest in it. You could have people that in their IRA, their 401k, a pension plan owned by the government could have 1 or 2% of its assets in grains sitting in the country, buying it
Yeah.
when there's an excess and storing it. And then when there's a premium, sell it off, but it keeps the availability of food there at all times for that country or that region or whatever the case may be, especially for disasters and internally displaced people and what have you. So that was the beginning of the World Food Bank. And then for the past 10 or 12 years, we've really focused on efficiency, because if you're buying those grains and wanting to store them, the challenge you have is buying good quality. In many developing markets, the quality of what's grown in these farms wouldn't be edible in the US, wouldn't be available. You couldn't sell it for animal feed. And so we had to take a step backwards and work with farmers to grow more and better. And to do that, they needed to use regenerative practices.
So is that when Henry comes into play?
And that's Henry. Then we met Henry, and Henry, brilliant guy who really has a heart for his neighbors and his community and for the country of Uganda. He started learning these new tactics and sharing. And he was all about sharing, which is not necessarily common among all farmers. And they started doing better and better. And he did well enough that he won a scholarship through the Gates Foundation to come back to Iowa, get some more advanced education. And then he came back and taught hundreds more farmers, and the incomes of those farmers just went up exponentially. And so that's why we say we need more Henrys.
Now, what made Henry want to work with you?
I think probably a few things. One is, in developing markets, you want to work with anybody that'll want to work with you. It's hard finding help. So there wasn't anything necessarily special about me. It's just someone that's willing to step out and step up, I guess. But the other is that we were realizing about the same time that we needed to do more than train individual farmers. Because if they went and learned on their own and then they went back to their farm, the cycle was done. But if we could get them gathered together, you could teach more of them at a time if they could gather in groups or clubs or cooperatives. But then if they gathered in groups that would also keep each other accountable, then you could buy inputs in volume and get a better price for inputs for them. You could also get them all growing the same thing so that when they were ready to sell, you could get enough for a truckload or 2 or 3. Now you have volume that you can go market to an end buyer instead of to an aggregator. In Africa, the average number of transactions between farm gate and market is 9. In the US, the average is 1.
Oh, gosh.
So everyone adds their fee. So what happens is the farmer gets squeezed and they get a very low price, some of the lowest prices in the world for their corn. But if you go to buy corn in the market in Nairobi, consumer's
got to have a rough
higher
time
than
too.
it is here.
Yeah.
Right, because of that spread. So if you're able to gather enough where you can sell it straight to the miller or processor or cereal producer or whatever it is, um, the farmer can get paid more and the miller gets a better price too. So creating that efficiency was kind of a core of what World Food Bank set out to do.
That's tremendous. So, and one of the other things that I understand you placed a focus on was this integrated ecosystem.
Mm.
So, when you look at the global poverty and hunger, and what gap do you see the World Food Bank filling? And I'm thinking especially about that integrated ecosystem. How does that play into it?
You know, um, I'm biased, so let me begin with that. My opinion is biased. In my opinion, along with it used to be $5, but now it's $7.50 will buy you a Starbucks. Um, but my opinion from what I've seen in the past 15 years is we won't achieve what we need to achieve with rebuilding the soils on the planet, pulling more water out of the air and putting it back into the ground where we have less issue with drought, solving the problems with nutrition, and certainly lifting 2 billion people out of poverty. I don't believe we will solve that out without community. I don't think we can teach everyone individually or even create apps or platforms or whatever to teach people individually. I think principally part of this comes from being raised in a faith-based background, but I think we're designed to work in community. Mm-hmm. And when we work in community, we achieve more. We grow a little bit more because we know that we have people calling us to account. We use the practices we said we'd be using because we have people holding us to account. But we also have all of those added benefits. So to me, if you take community to every level of the ecosystem, that model of integration becomes the most efficient. If you know, and I'll give you a real life example. If you're a farmer and you're growing chickens on part of your farm, and you're growing corn and soy and vegetables on another part of your farm, and I can come to you and say, look, if you're a part of a group that's a bronze level group and you go to silver to gold to platinum, and when you get to platinum, as your group gets to be a platinum farmer, I will double whatever you're able to purchase. So if you go from 100 chickens to 200 to 400 and your group is 20 people, they now have 8,000 chickens. I'll finance 8,000 more day-old chicks. Now you've doubled your growth like that. If you grow tomatoes and peppers, if you're part of a platinum group and I know that you stick together in what you're doing, I will get you your inputs for 15% below what you can pay. I will get you 10% more for what you grow than what you can normally sell them for at market. Then I'll go to 5 groups together in 5 villages around one common area, and we'll take 1,000 people and we'll finance a walk-in dryer so that you can take all those tomatoes, peppers, onions that are too ripe that are going to go to waste, which is somewhere between 40 and 65% of all that's grown in sub-Saharan Africa. And you're going to slice them up, put them on a sheet in a walk-in dryer, and where you got $1.50 for a 5-gallon bucket of tomatoes wet, I'll give you $3.50 for that same amount dried, for 2 reasons. One is I now have a 6 to 12 month shelf life. You've just cut my weight 70%, so I can haul a whole lot more in a truck. And you've gone through the process of cleaning it and adding a level of processing, so you've upped the value for something that otherwise was going to be thrown away. You're going to take those extra dollars and put them into buying your animal feed from the miller, from the feed mill. And that feed mill is the guy who bought the corn and soy from you. So as the farmer, you sell the corn and soy, we aggregate it as World Food Bank and bring it to the miller. We make sure that it meets the specs that they want. And then he sells back to the farmers to grow their chickens. And we finance the feed for the chickens. So we finance the chickens, finance the feed for the chickens. We buy the corn and soy from the farmer. We buy the chickens from the farmer. And then this year, when there's the biggest drought in 100 years, everyone's margins got squeezed. Mm-hmm. Instead of the farmer losing money, the miller scaled back, the packaging guys scaled back, the farmer scaled back, but everyone made a little bit. They made half as much as they did last year, but everyone made money and they can afford to
But it
grow
was
again next
positive,
season.
right?
Because we're all dependent on one another for the ecosystem to work. That's the miracle and the model of it, and it's actually out of Leviticus. It's nothing new. We just haven't been doing it.
But you found the application, and one of the neatest things about this World Food Bank model that you've created is this hybrid model between nonprofit and for-profit. And again, it comes back to that inefficiencies.
Right.
I don't know how else to ask this, but can you explain how and why? Because I understand that the for-profit actually benefits and makes the nonprofit more effective. And I think it's based on what you were just saying. So if you could please just spell that out for me.
That's a really, really great point. There's a need for nonprofits. So I don't like to denigrate the nonprofits. We have too many nonprofits doing too much nonprofit work. We need more nonprofits building for-profit businesses and maybe aggregating together to fill the gaps. But there are a lot of problems that we solve by throwing money at it, where we could solve the problem by teaching a man to fish instead of giving him a fish, right? And so when there are times in, I'll give you a real life example. When the Maasai, I wrote an article actually for a magazine, and I had the article pulled because I thought it was too discouraging. It was too negative. But the title of the article was "The Children Die First." And I grew up in the South, and my mother would say, if you weren't behaving, she would say, "I can make more of you," kind of implying, I will slap you into last Wednesday or what have you, but you better start behaving. And you kind of go, look, she's serious, and you start behaving. But we don't really think about it. But in most of the developing world, in parts of India and parts of Asia, and certainly in sub-Saharan Africa, and certainly in pastoralist environments where people are living in the pasture and they're killing animals and they're foraging, when you're going 1,000 miles from one end of your farm season to another end of your farm season, bringing cows and goats with you, living primarily off the milk, and as age comes onto the animals, then you slaughter certain animals. When you have a drought, those animals run out of food, and as they get weak, they begin slaughtering them and eating them. In the Maasai, over the past 3 or 4 years, we've had multiple instances where they've eaten all of their animals, and now they don't have milk and they don't have protein, and all they have is foraging. The model in those environments is for the male, the father, to eat first. Because if the father can't kill animals or plant new things or find animals that he can take captive, no one's going to live. The mother eats next for similar reasons. Then the children eat. If there's very limited food, the father eats his fill. The mother eats her fill, and then the children eat. If there's not enough food, you may go for weeks where father eats, sometimes father and mother eats, but children don't eat, which you can see the results of that is the children die first. So for one, it should break your heart. But the second is to realize that I can't go to that person and say, look, you're not doing pastoralism correctly. We need to change the way you do this.
Right.
That's really great for somebody that has 4 cows and 50 goats. But for some guy that's eating his last animal, that's the wrong words at the wrong time. So for those people, we need to come in and show them that we love them, that we want to help them, and that we're going to fill the gap. So the foundation comes in, and we've shipped truckloads of goats, enough male and enough female that they can rebuild their group and feed to get them started during the next period. That's what the foundation does. When there's a natural disaster and we need to send food to Mississippi or to Florida or to whatever the case is, we reach out to people, they send dollars in. We take food that's already prepared. We send it down there within 8 to 12 hours so that it meets up with those organizations that are going to cook it and serve it. And we take that money and we go manufacture more meals so that now you've restocked the bank of foods. That's what the foundation does. The World Food Bank is designed to be benevolently for profit. So our goal isn't to make extraordinary profits, but our goal is to create a sustainable model so that if I buy from those farmers, we take a 1% commission. When we sell to the miller, we take a 1% commission. When there are when there's horticulture, same thing. We take a little commission on each piece. And when you do that across many farmers in many regions, it's a self-sustaining platform. It
Mm-hmm.
also means that something happens to me, something, there's a drought, there's a whatever. One is that we build up a storage. The farmers have a savings account. We have a store of extra food. When the prices are low, we want to be a bank. So we'll have more and more people investing into the World Food Bank through donor advised funds or what have you. They can invest, and that money goes to buy the food that we store. And then when it's needed,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's Red Cross or World Food Program or whomever purchases that, the money goes back in to buy more. And the idea is slowly is to build a network of stored food. So there's a banking function, but there's also an operational piece. We want to be able to finance that walk-in dryer, finance that flour mill, finance that oil press, so that vertically, to your point, that integrated system becomes where the farmer not only owns the products that they produce on the farm, but they own a piece of the mill. They own a piece of the CPG that makes the packages that sells their eggs. They own a piece of the abattoir that produces the chickens, or the cows or the pigs or whatever. And by doing that, they are being vertically integrated. They've now reduced their risk. They become more investable, more bankable, more insurable. And so the goal for us is, as we invest in those, the goal is you build that vertical value chain, and then you slowly sell it back out to the holders, to the stakeholders, so that eventually we leave and all of the local people are stakeholders in that vertical ecosystem.
Mm-hmm. I think back to a couple of years ago when Elon Musk was buying Twitter. And there's this controversy because somebody said, well, for the amount you're paying for Twitter, we could have solved world hunger or something like that. And they gave some dollar amount.
Right.
And he gave them a challenge. If you can demonstrably show me that we can end world hunger with that number of dollars, we'll make it happen.
I'll write that check.
I'll write the check. Right now,
Right.
How would you respond to him or even respond to the other person in that scenario?
It's a really great question. Because I actually responded to that question. I actually wrote a response back, either I think it was on LinkedIn, as an open letter to Elon Musk in response to it. Elon had posed that question, and our response was, "You're talking about spending $6 billion. I think it was $6 billion or $4 billion. You could solve the problem." And what we said is, well, for $6 billion, we would go in and provide all the education to farmers in emerging markets. They would have to become part of a club. They don't get a single dollar until they're part of a club. They can sell their goat to buy 80-day-old chicks. When they take those 80-day-old chicks and double it in 6 weeks and then double it again, they're going to want to participate. They'll learn foundations for farming, where they learn to feed their family of 6 on 1/8 of a hectare. And once they begin to participate, we will guarantee a market for them. We'll have those who do well produce inputs, and we'll finance part of the inputs, and we'll partner with regional banks and country banks, so a third, so that everyone's accountable to one another. And if you can build those pieces vertically, you can do that. You wouldn't even need that to start with. You'd start out with about $1.4 billion.
Mm-hmm.
And
you
as
kind of create the flywheel,
it's now
right?
bankable, investable. You don't need any more money. But if you had $6 billion, you could do it everywhere in the world, and you could solve that problem. The challenge is that there are organizations that don't want that to happen. They make their money off of the inefficiencies of markets. Some are actually leaders in government, and not just foreign governments in developing markets, but in our own government. We have a problem with being paid to be inefficient. So anyway, that's
in many areas. No, I understand.
You got to turn that kettle of fish over. But if you had people in charge that could do it, you could mandate that for a number of years, you could get that problem solved. Absolutely.
Fascinating. Really interesting perspective with what you've built too, with World Food Bank. But you touched on the education piece. And that's one of the things that we haven't spent a whole lot of time talking about yet. I want to make sure that we touch on that, because that is a key component to what you offer. You talked about Henry and making sure he made it to Iowa State and was able to bring back all of that education to all of these hundreds of other farmers in the area. So tell me a little bit more about the education piece, and then Shamba Shakeup and now Farm Hero. How does all that play together?
The catalyst, as you kind of suggested, for Henry, he was doing a great job teaching hundreds of farmers. But once he went to Iowa and had the skill set and had the format, he taught thousands. So it really catalyzed what he was doing by having that education. He was more sure of what he was going to teach. And he also had a team of people to help him. That made all the difference in the world. We say there's 4 core components to revitalizing, building a permanent, strong, secure, and resilient food or agricultural ecosystem. One is access to education. The other is access to quality inputs. The third is access to finance to scale. And the fourth is assured access to markets. Education, though, is the first one, and it is the most important. You can't do what you don't know. And so people have to have access to education, which is why when we were working with thousands of farmers in Uganda, we would have 26% of those would adopt the practices that we taught. And maybe it was because it was some white guy from Cornell University talking to them about soil and growing. And understandably, they go, look, you're not from here. You don't understand the problems, the practices, what we grow and how we, and they're absolutely right. We can look at their soil and say, based on this, you should grow it that way. But all of those other things are, they contribute to that perspective that they have. What they want to hear is from their neighbor, a successful neighbor. And this really came to light when I was at BIFAD, and they give away, and USAID, the Agency for International Development, is probably the single largest donor investor into international development on behalf of the U.S. taxpayer. And so they give away one award a year for 2,700 to 3,500 projects or programs they have going around the world. One gets an award for innovation. And they were giving the award to this TV network or this TV group in Kenya. And they had produced this TV show called Shamba Shape Up. And Shamba is like a small farm, what in Latin we would call a finca. And so it's Shamba Shape Up, it was like a farm makeover show, like we have home makeover shows. And I watched the show and I met with the leadership there, and the fellow who had founded, just a brilliant, brilliant guy. He had worked for the British government and doing development for a number of years, spent most of his life growing up and living in sub-Saharan Africa, Uganda, Kenya, what have you, and educated in Europe. And he realized the same thing. But he had realized it years before I had, that if you want to change the world, and the Bible says that if you sow as you help the least of these, is as if you help me, Jesus would say, right? So the goal is always, let's help the worst of the worst. Let's go to the leper, right? But what we found is that in agriculture, helping the person that makes $1 a day, trying to teach them is tough. And that was the subject of a TED talk that I did, TEDx talk that I did as well. But if you have $1 and $1 a day income, and you're eating one meal a day, and you have maybe one child in school, you're more concerned about the risk than you are about the upside opportunity. So you can go, look, you have a 4 out of 5 chance you're going to be successful. And they go, well, that's great. But if I'm that 1 out of 5, I'm toast. I don't eat for weeks and I have to take my kid out of school. I would rather keep where I'm at now and not take that risk. They will take that risk when their neighbor who has 10 acres tries it with 1 or 2 acres and sees success. Then they will go to that neighbor and say, hey, I want to do that with part of my land. Can I buy seeds with you? Can you show me how you did it? Am I doing it right? But now they have community. When they can have community with people in their area that know their soil and know their problems, things explode. They go crazy. And this TV program was reaching out to people on TV, featuring local people. And they would go out and meet with them, hear about their problems, bring in an expert to help solve the problem, and then show the end result. And they could associate with the person that they saw. And they found that 36% of the people watching the show would adopt practices. If they were raising potatoes, if they were growing potatoes, they would adopt practices for potatoes. If they had dairy cows, they would adopt the practices for their dairy cow. 36%. I had less than that teaching live on our own farm. And so we realized for that amount of money, they were about 180 times more cost effective, 180 times. So needless to say, we said, we want to invest into this. We want to help expand it. Let's grow it. And they already had an established team that is just really, really great, expanded into Uganda. where they now have over 2 million viewers, Zambia, parts of Tanzania, now actually in Australia, New Zealand, and growing like crazy. But we realized a light switch was flipped that if you're going to affect change across millions of people, and they now, by the way, have north of 12 million, closer to 14 million weekly viewers. They would be the number one show in the US if they were in the US. And they're the top show in Eastern Africa. And there's several other shows that have been built as a result of that. So we realize that media does have to be a component considering how important education is. So education now includes partnerships with NGOs to teach locally, with the same thing building on top of that being taught on TV through the TV programming.
Yeah, well, you're using that lever right now.
It's a game changer. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I want to know.
And now doing it in the US.
Yeah. So, and that's Farm Hero.
That's Farm Hero, right? In the US, it's different though, right? In sub-Saharan Africa, about 72% of the people watching TV are directly engaged with agriculture. They are either a farmer or an immediate member. Mother, brother, father, sister is a farmer. So even 40-something% of the viewers of the TV show actually live in the city. They live in Nairobi or they live in Kampala or what have you, but they have a family member that's a farmer. So they watch it and they go, wow, we should use this, this technique. We should use this water pump. We should try this medicine for worms or whatever the case may be. In the US, though, it's different. We have less than 1 million farmers. So less than 1% of the population. So in the US, to get people to recognize the importance of soil and that the living biome of soil with 80 billion species living in a handful of soil there's more life in that handful of soil than all the rest of the world. The dirt is it's kind of like the ocean. We just still don't know everything about it. The soil is even more massive in the number of living things that are in the soil. But all of those things work together the same way the human enteric system works. You have nerves and you have blood vessels and you have whatever. In the ground, you have channels that are built by worms that open up spaces for roots to grow. And the bacteria talks to the fungus, and the fungus stimulates the change and the breakdown of rocks into minerals that are absorbed and sent to the plant and what have you. When that's dead, what you end up growing is something that looks like a tomato, but it doesn't have very much nutrition. When the soil is strong, it has tons of nutrition. And so many of the problems we have in the world today are because the soil doesn't hold the structure that it had before. And so Farm Hero is focused on getting people to understand the importance of soil and how it relates to the food that they eat, and getting corporations to start embracing that by guaranteeing a marketplace for the food that's grown in that kind of regenerative environment.
Well, it seems like it's a really timely topic right now. It seems to be in the news a lot more lately, especially. So I wish all the success with that one, especially here as you prepare to launch. But I want to ask you about you, just because you've talked all about this wonderful work you're doing all over the world in Africa and now here in the United States. But what are you hoping to build here? Because you're looking to build something that's going to be beyond you, right?
Yeah. Well, my last name is Lackey, so I know what my place is in the world. We were really right before COVID. We were expanding about 4x across the countries that we were working in Africa, and we had added 4 times more storage facilities. We were contracting to buy 4 times more grain, and what have you. And then the challenge that we had is during COVID, we had a lot of millers and processors that were contracted to buy that didn't pay. So we would ship them their stuff and then they couldn't pay. And during the season, you're buying and selling. You're using the money that they pay you to turn around and go buy the next slot. So when in 4 to 6 weeks after harvest, no one's paying you, you're essentially shut down. So we went from a year that was going to be exponential growth to a year of exponential loss. And so we've been rebuilding. And we have some great leaders lined up in Africa. We have some great teams in the US as well, and emerging teams in Europe and in Asia. So my hope is that within the next 3 years or so, we're going to have all of those teams rebuilt. And my position will be more in strategy and as truly, my title is really chairman, CEO, but I really would aspire to be chairman and not CEO. To have people come in and run those areas, and quite frankly, there's probably more effective at all of those areas than I am. And there are people that are better at the grain trading. There's people that are better at organizing NGOs for training. And all of that. I've kind of exhausted my skill set, I think. So uh, my goal is to work myself out of a job. Yeah.
Now, is your family involved currently?
My wife is actually is the managing director for the foundation, and her goal is she has a very specific area that she really likes, and we've actually had recent discussions about this. We recently celebrated our 30th anniversary,
Oh,
and we
congratulations.
were shopping for farms ourselves to move to kind of an estate farm where we can grow and use it maybe as a training facility for people to come in and learn about regenerative agriculture. And as we discussed, what all do you want to do? I think she agreed that she wants to expand the board of directors for the World Food Bank Foundation, which we're still in the process. It's taken us almost 3 years now because of all the other stuff going on to convert from a private family foundation to a public foundation. And that's
Hmm.
been a real challenge. But hopefully that'll be done before the end of this year. And our goal is to have a global leadership team. And my wife really wants to focus on children. She wants to teach children, help create curricula for children. And we've been even working on a set of books for kids like second grade, fourth grade, sixth grade to teach the miracle of nature in soil and animals and ecosystems, how they work together. And I think that's her focus. She would love to have children come to the farm. She would love to work with children in developing markets, but her passion has always been children. And so I think that's everything else will push to other people to run.
That's amazing. I didn't realize that this was all being done starting from a private family foundation and it's built
Mhm.
into this. That's just tremendous. That's huge. And then, okay. So
Been a lot.
last question is, what do you hope when this is all said and done is your legacy as a result of it?
Um, well, quite simply, I hope that I hear, "Well done, good and faithful servant." um, I guess to me, if we build a more efficient food system and we are able to cross those chasms that exist between the silos in government agencies. And interestingly, that'll probably happen more quickly in developing markets because those silos haven't been quite as well established.
Mm,
But we can do that in the US where all the extra food is bought. There's a home for every grain, there's a home for every fruit, and there's a process added. And we have and there's jobs needed, whether it's veterans or whomever, or that we build systems where they can take on those jobs, fill the gap, and no kid goes home over the weekend without food to feed them, you know?
mhm.
And where the 1.1 billion people living in poverty, that their primary resource is ground, to have them learn enough to feed their family and to contribute to the economy. That there is one caveat I would say: we have to be, when we think we want people to live like us, that is not a goal for most of the world.
Mm.
I was with an amazing fellow in Uganda. We were meeting with a number of young ladies who had 20 plus ladies that had been growing and doing very well using this system model. And they had gone from $300 or $400 a year to over $9,000 a year in income. And we said, look, we have this large farm. We'd like to allocate 2,000 acres to you from about the 200 you farm together now. We'd like to 10x that.
Hmm.
And we will let you grow it. And as you grow it after a year or two, if you're comfortable, we'll finance your purchasing it. If there's a bad year, you don't have to pay us. A good year, you pay X%. But you could take your salary or your income to $30,000 a year each. And we thought that was pretty awesome. And the ladies that were leading it said, well, question for clarification. Are you wanting us to do this, or are you needing us to do this? And we said, well, we're going to have someone farm it, but we thought it would be it's an offer. You don't need to do it. And they said, well, we'll talk and we'll get back. They went outside and they came back a few minutes later and said, Um, you know, our lives are, we all have a metal roof on our house. We all have concrete floors. All of our children are in school. We have money saved for medicine. We have all of us are part of a savings pool. 4 of us already have a truck. We get to work each day and we spend every afternoon together, and we love being together. We are living the perfect life. We could never have imagined we would have a life this great. But you guys have helped us so much. If you want us to do that, we'll take it on.
I love
If you
that.
don't need us to do it, we're happy where we are. And we looked at each other and we realized, we have to be really careful about throwing on Americanized ideals that if you make 10 grand, you want it next is 100. And if you make 100, you want to make $1 million. If you want to make $1 million, you want to make $1 billion. They were happy. They lived a great quality of life. They spent time with family. They had all their children in school. They had met the goal. So the target for us was really to move to another village, not to help that village keep growing. And so that's one of the things that I would say is that our goal is to give people the platform to where they can grow to that point. It doesn't have to be beyond that. Everyone doesn't have to make $100,000 either.
Richard, what a great perspective to end with too. I needed that today. I think so many of us do on a daily basis. But thank you for taking this time with me. And my gosh, best of luck with everything you're doing with the World Food Bank, with Food Hero, and all the other things you have going on. You got so many other things going on too that we didn't even touch on here. But thank you for this time.
No, thank you, Matt. I'm obliged. I appreciate your taking time with me.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Philanthropist Friday. If you found this valuable, please be sure to like, subscribe, and share. This show is brought to you by Honey Hive Capital Partners. Visit us at honeyhivepartners.com to continue your philanthropy journey. This recording represents the views and opinions of its guests and does not reflect the views and opinions of Honey Hive Capital Partners, LLC. Nothing in this recording nor any communications from it should be treated as constituting financial, investment, legal, tax, or other advice of any kind, or as a recommendation to buy or sell an interest with respect to any investment. We look forward to you joining us next time.